Today we continue our NHL offseason plan video. We're now on the 9th ranked team from the NHL's regular season, the St. Louis Blues. The Blues are going to have a lot of interesting decisions to make. Today we'll discuss what we feel they will do and what's most important to them to get ready for next year. Coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, today we're taking a look at the St. Louis Blues offseason and what we should expect from them as we get into the full scale of the offseason here very shortly. There's only 4 teams left in the 2022 NHL Stanley Cup Playoffs, so that means 28 of 32 teams are in full scale offseason mode now as they begin their prep work to get ready for the draft and free agency. And let's take a look at what we should expect from St. Louis in those regards. Now let's first recap the 21-22 season. We'll have a quick look at their salary cap space, look at expiring contracts, and then take a look at the top burning questions facing this franchise and what their top priorities will be coming up here in the offseason. So the Blues finished with a 49-22-11 record for a 109-point season. That's a pretty solid year overall. Certainly made the playoffs. They won their first round matchup against the Minnesota Wild. They took care of that in 6 games. And then, of course, they ended up falling to the Colorado Avalanche in round 2. So obviously the Blues were trying to force a game 7, and they did unfortunately lose due to a goal by Darren Helm of the Avalanche with just over 5 seconds remaining in game 6. It was a 2-2 game going into what looked to be overtime, and Helm shocked everybody with a last-second slap shot that Ville Husso didn't see, went in the net, and the series in the game came to an end. So certainly a situation where the Blues had a pretty good playoff run. I'm sure they all, like always, teams want to go for the cup and would have liked it to be longer, but overall I think we can say their season was pretty successful. Now looking at some team stats here, goals for were really solid. They scored 309 goals, which to crack 300 is really, really good. Third best in the NHL, only giving up 239, which is 11th best. So overall, those are really excellent numbers. The power play was exceptional this year, 27% for second best in the NHL. And the PK was just as solid, really 84.1%. for 5th best. So ideally you want your PK and your power play to add up to at least 100%, ideally more than that. And they certainly passed that test with flying colors here. 27 and 84 would get you 111.1. So that's a combined result that's absolutely solid. We saw some goaltending changes this year. Jordan Binnington obviously came in the starter, had his struggles this year. Ville Husso takes the number 1 job from him, but then by playoff time, Binnington takes it back, only to get hurt, and then Husso has to go back to being number 1 again to finish out the rest of the playoffs until they were done. So it'll be interesting to see what happens here because Husso is a UFA, which we'll discuss here coming up later in the video. Now let's take a look at their salary cap space that they're facing here this offseason to deal with any potential offseason moves. Now, as we can see, the St. Louis Blues, courtesy of CapFriendly.com here, have 17 contracts already in place for next season and beyond. Those contracts come to a total of $72.725 million, which only leaves them $9.77 million available to work with. So once we take a look at the contracts that are outstanding and who needs to be signed or replaced, we'll see that might not go too far, and we could even see, like a lot of teams, try to find some ways to maybe find a little bit of extra cap flexibility. But before we do that, let's take a look at their expiring contracts. Who are the RFAs and UFAs on this team that either need to be re-signed or possibly replaced? Now looking at the RFAs first, we have a couple of young defensemen in Scott Perunovich and Nico Mikkola. Obviously both players I fully suspect will get qualifying offers. There's no doubt about that. Both players factor into the Blues' future 100%. I don't suspect they're going to be making a ton of money because they're not really established to the point that they'll get big paydays, but they will certainly get a bit of a raise over their previous contracts. So obviously they're not going to be expensive to sign, but it all adds up. As I said, less than $10 million to work with to get all this looked after. Now on the UFA side of things, we have David Perron, we have Tyler Bozak, we have Nick Leddy, who came over as a rental, and of course the big question mark here, Ville Husso, who's proven to be a real solid goaltender. Maybe you want to call him a little bit of a late bloomer, which is not unusual in the goaltending position. But still, decision has to be made on whether or not he's back, or maybe he decides to explore other avenues. Calle Rosen was set to become a UFA as well, but he just signed a 2-year, 2-way contract extension to remain with the St. Louis Blues. So obviously that's a player who can be on the roster, but it's a 2-way deal, so he can be demoted. and obviously not have to worry about it affecting the cap if it works out that he ends up playing in the American Hockey League. So obviously a guy like Tyler Bozak, it's debatable if he's back. He did sign a 3-year contract as a free agent a few years back, completed that. Last year came back for 1 year at $750, I believe it was. So certainly, could he be back again for another year league minimum? Maybe. It's one of those players and one of those deals that it could go either way. I'm not sure how he or the team feels about things. I don't know what his intentions are, what their intentions are. If he comes back, I would have to say it's probably would have to be the same contract, or they move on, or he moves on. Maybe he retires. I'm not sure. We'll have to wait and find out the future of Bozak. Nick Leddy, I'm not sure that he returns either. Like I said, he was a rental, but the Blues do have to take a look at their blue line to some degree in the offseason, but I don't know if he really fits in long-term or not. And then, of course, Husso's the big question here that we really don't know. There apparently is mutual interest between the St. Louis Blues and David Perron to get an extension completed and to keep him on the St. Louis Blues roster. But, of course, that still has to be worked out. Now, let's now jump into the final segment here. The top burning questions facing his franchise, or what are their top priorities? Now, to me, one of the big questions, which we kind of got a vague answer about from GM Doug Armstrong after the team was eliminated, is what does the future hold for Vladimir Tarasenko? Does he still want to have his trade request honored? Does he want to stay? He's entering the final year of his contract at $7 million. So I would think if they did want to consider a trade, it would be easier now, given the fact that he had a solid year. I think all the question marks around his health can probably go to the wayside, and people and other teams and managers can see that he's still quite productive. So I don't think there'd be concerns like there was at this time last year. But given how he played and that he is an important player there, if he's okay to stay, then they probably will remain with the organization. But Doug Armstrong, when he was asked about this trade request, all he said was that he was not worried about Vladdy for next year. He didn't say, yes, he's fine to stay. He didn't say, yes, the trade request still stands. He didn't really answer the question directly, so it's hard to get a clear-cut answer. To me, I'm kind of taking it as a fact as things went well, things are better. We're not moving him. That's kind of what I felt like he meant, but he didn't clarify or say that, so it's hard just to kind of say for sure. So I guess we'll see, but to get that clarified would be good. And of course, because he's also eligible for a contract extension. Is that something that he would be open to remain with the St. Louis Blues? I don't know. Maybe he decides that he'll play out the contract and then just kind of wait and see how next year goes and then make a decision from there. Maybe he's one of the bigger names on next year's UFA market. It's difficult to say, but there's a lot of question marks still around this player. And even if his short-term future is with the Blues, is his long-term future with the Blues? Questions that they need to have answered. Now, as I mentioned, the second big question here to me, and it's almost more important, is the goaltending situation. We saw a situation this year where Jordan Binnington lost the net to Husso for a while, and obviously he regained some form in the playoffs, but after winning the Cup, he got signed to a pretty mega extension. Now, of course, that extension still has a lot of time on it. It's just in the beginning phases of that contract at $6 million. So, you know, I would think that the Blues have some concerns over that. I mean, like, given how he played this year. So it'd be interesting to see how they proceed. With Husso being a UFA, he had a real solid season, so he's certainly going to be able to command a little bit more money in term. He's not at the level that Binnington was when he hit that same stage after winning the Stanley Cup, because obviously he didn't go that far with things, right? It's kind of funny when you think about it, because theoretically, Ville Husso almost should have been in Jordan Binnington's position back in 2019 when he got that call up or 2018-19 when they won a 19 Stanley Cup to get that opportunity. Because theoretically, Ville Husso was already kind of regarded as a goalie of the future in the organization. I know when at one point when it was like Jake Allen and Brian Elliott, and then Husso was the younger goalie in the organization, kind of looked upon as being the guy of the future. And then when Elliott left and they had just Jake Allen as the main guy for a couple of years, obviously Jake did better as a backup or a tandem type of goalie. He did struggle a bit. I'm not sure if it's a pressure issue or what it is, but he's been a way better goalie when he hasn't had to be the guy carrying the workload. But either way, you know, from there, Husso was kind of looked upon as the next guy who would eventually take Jake's spot. And that never happened. But only because when they decided that Jake was struggling and they needed to bring up another goalie to give a chance, Binnington became that guy because Husso was injured, and now here we are in a spot where Husso kind of took the job back in a way, but then it's like a stranglehold. But, I wouldn't rule out the possibility that they sign him and he stays, but we don't know what Ville Husso's intent is here. He's 27 years old. He's at a spot where he's a UFA, had a solid year. There's teams out there that really need a goaltender, but at the grand scheme of things, he doesn't have a big body of work. So you have to think that that's going to concern some teams. So how much is the market going to be for Husso? We don't really know. Like, there's going to be teams that have question marks around their goaltending next year. Like, I know Chicago comes to mind. Obviously, they're rebuilding. Even Montreal, who had like Jake Allen's in Montreal. Could he rejoin Jake in Montreal? You never know, because Carey Price has big question marks on his future. Are they comfortable with Samuel Montembeault? Like, it's possible they could, not as likely, but it's possible they could be in the market. Even look to a team like Edmonton, where Koskinen is not going to be back. They have Mike Smith for 1 year. They could use a younger goalie for the future. Is Husso that guy? How much do they think of him? I don't know. And there's other teams too. New Jersey comes to mind as well. So, what kind of offers will there be? Like I said, until he's played, say 100 games, it's harder to get a big enough body of work to really be comfortable with things. So I don't know if the contract offers are not substantial. Maybe he stays and gets like a shorter term deal with St. Louis for a couple $1 million. Maybe they can make it work. I don't know, because if really with $10 million, they could probably sign Perron and Husso and then qualify their RFAs to be tight. Maybe they have to move one player to shed some money. I don't know, but it's not unreasonable to think that they could get it done. Another big thing they could look to do this offseason too is to extend captain Ryan O'Reilly. He's 31 years old, making $7.5 million, entering the final year of his contract. So this is not something that's super urgent, but if they have mutual interest on both sides to keep him being the Blues captain and stay in St. Louis, then I'm sure they'll want to have discussions around a contract. Obviously, it's where he's 31. I don't think it's fair to say he's declining. He's still a really, really good player. I don't know that he's playing at the level that he did when they won the Stanley Cup, though. So it's debatable on what that number is going to be. Obviously, it's something that has to be thought about, and I would think that they probably want to take advantage and get an extension done if they plan to keep him around, which I expect them to do, because if he comes back this year and has an even bigger year, then it's going to push his value up, and the number usually never goes down. So it's something that they might want to look into. You can also start exploring extensions for a couple of the younger players that are a big part of the team's core moving forward, and that's Jordan Kyrou and Robert Thomas, who had exceptional years this year, really showing that they can be more important players, bigger roles in this team. So they're entering the last year of their RFA deal, so obviously getting them looked after long term might be wise as well. More so than in the case of O'Reilly, they're still projecting upwards because they're still hitting their prime, right? So whereas, O'Reilly theoretically should be on the tail end of it, and, we should start to see a little bit of a production decline theoretically. Those, 30-plus contracts are more risky than ones in their, early to mid-20s. So those are two important pieces that they're going to want to get contracts in. Based on how they played this year, I don't see their value dropping any. If anything, is going to go up. And if the longer they wait, the more they're going to have to pay them. So that's all that being said. I think that's some big business for the Blues to take care of. And with all that being said, I think that we're probably going to end up seeing at least a little bit of a cap casualty situation. I kind of think maybe a guy like Marco Scandella might become, expendable. I know the blue line is certainly, and it's not terrible by any means, but it's certainly an area of focus for them to improve on. I mean, unfortunately, Torrey Krug missed a lot of time here, wasn't available, as their season came to an end. So obviously that was a big blow. You got Colton Parayko back there, the big right shot defenseman. Obviously Justin Falk, probably one of the more underrated guys around the league too. And then of course they have some of these younger guys that are getting more of a role too, like Perunovich and Mikula, etc. So could they add on the blue line? It's possible, but somebody less expensive than Scandella would probably be wise. So I can see him being expendable. If you look to the forward group, it's kind of tough to see who could go. I've seen somebody online suggest that maybe a guy like Ivan Barbashev could be a cap casualty, and that would be a real tough loss for St. Louis. He had a real nice season this year and is still at the same time not peaked yet. And so I'd be very careful with that. That's much for sure. But either way, with all the potential extensions in place, getting some UFAs signed, figuring out their goaltending, maybe a small adjustment on the blue line, this is going to be a very busy offseason for Doug Armstrong in the St. Louis Blues. So we will see, as we could see a lot of activity around the NHL Draft and the beginning of free agency on July 13th. Wouldn't be shocking if they get some other business like a Perron extension or something in place sooner than later, but we will see. Let me know your thoughts on what you expect from the Blues in the offseason down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to this channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.